Welcome to Undercurrents, everybody, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is David Harsanyi. Subscribe here wherever you get your podcasts and at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. I have a question. Shouldn't we be talking about Russian collusion right about now? It didn't take long after Donald Trump's 2016 victory for lawmakers, pundits, and journalists to argue that Hillary Clinton was defeated in large part due to interference by Vladimir Putin on behalf of Trump. Now, though, the hashtag resistance is low energy. There's some introspection happening on the left, but it almost feels like the fever of 2016 is finally broken. We probably won't know that for sure until Trump takes office again and starts to try fundamentally reshaping the government. What came to be known as, quote, BlueAnon developed after Donald Trump's 2016 win and continued on at least until this last election night as popular X accounts like Mueller, she wrote, spun wild conspiracy theories about vote totals being off, and as our friend Ken Klippenstein pointed out, those theories were even reposted by prominent Democrats, well, like the party chair Jamie Harrison. BlueAnon refers, of course, to QAnon, implicitly kind of casting those two movements as parallel tracks. The right's Q world, which sees Trump as the hero of a quest to free the U.S. from a group of corrupt and sexually deviant elites, is mirrored then by BlueAnon, which sees Putin's hand in every Democratic failure and every Trump policy. So are these equally irrational movements? David Harsanyi, a conservative writer at the Washington Examiner and my former colleague at the Federalist, recently wrote the book on the subject, titled The Rise of BlueAnon, How the Democrats Became a Party of Conspiracy Theorists. David's book argues that while the right struggles with, quote, fringe attractions to Q, the left's version of QAnon is actually a mainstream movement in the Democratic Party, and that's thanks in no small part to cloistered newsrooms, as David sees it. So does waning media power explain the difference between 2016 and 2024? As the Democrats grope for a solution to their recent losses of the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, this question is very, very important to be addressed honestly. So we're in luck that David Harsanyi joins us now for just such a discussion of his controversial thesis, where I'll eagerly play the role of devil's advocate and probably find some agreement with David as well, too. David Harsanyi, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
David, can you start by just telling us what is BlueAnon? I know if you're really online, you can define BlueAnon very easily, unless you're a member of BlueAnon, of course, and then you would have no idea what it is because you're so deep. But what is it basically, and have you had to explain it to many people over the course of writing this book?
Yeah, I have. And I am very online, so it makes sense to me. But and it was a nice shortcut to sort of explain a whole movement and a whole effort that's gone on for decades, really, that includes people in the news media, who includes politicians, all of people who are conspiratorial in their thinking, kind of like a modern paranoid style of American politics. BlueAnon is obviously just a takeoff on the QAnon movement on the right. The difference, of course, is that the QAnon movement is actually on the fringes. I'm pretty much enmeshed in the world of conservative journalism, I guess, and I've never actually met anyone who believes QAnon stuff. I've only heard about it from the mainstream press. So QAnon, a play on that, is BlueAnon, which is actually far more mainstream. And the point of my book that conspiratorial ideas and the paranoia of the left is far more mainstream, far more accepted and packaged in a way calibrated for plausibility and all that makes it a lot more dangerous than the fringy right-wing stuff.
So let me jump in as devil's advocate here, David, and say one of the things people like you and I make a point about all the time is that conservative media is different than the Republican base. Conservative media is obviously more elite, more insulated, and lives in cities and all of that, for the most part, except for you, of course. But other than that, there's this key distinction between conservative media and conservative activists. Like before she ran for Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, famously a QAnon curious person, wasn't writing for the Federalist, where you and I worked, before she ran for Congress. So does it even matter? Can we say, well, you have people being elected to Congress who were interested in QAnon, you have Donald Trump retweeting QAnon posts when he was president, etc. Does it matter that conservative media isn't QAnon curious when we're making the comparison between the left and the right, given that there are some people who have made their way into political spaces that are highly conspiratorial, and even QAnon in particular.
Listen, there's no doubt, and I make no excuses for the right in general having, being susceptible to the same kind of, conspiratorial ideas. There's no doubt about it. No one is immune from it. No one's ever been immune from it. It exists. We all remember birtherism, whatever. There are plenty of things going on now as well. And you make a good point about certain politicians. So I initially in the book, when I sort of go through this history, I make it clear that I'm not forgiving anyone, as you know me, and I don't like that stuff at all happening anywhere. But by your question, in a sense, you're proving the point. It does exist, but there is no bill. There is no investigation into QAnon stuff. There is no Mueller, report on QAnon goings on. Whereas Russia collusion hoax, which was probably the most successful political conspiracy theory in American history, honestly, if not in all of history, it essentially shut down an administration for 3.5 years. They couldn't do anything. They were enveloped by this idea that the president himself was an asset of Russia. You had, the Jonathan Chaits of the world who are in, were and are in respected seats, writing, I don't want to curse, but like just unhinged, stories about how Donald Trump was an asset since, for Russia since 1987, since the Soviet Union. You don't see that happening as much on the right. Think about birtherism, right? Like, obviously, again, I don't think it's wrong to question something, but if the facts are in, you should move on. That's basically my opinion. But rejected by John McCain during his campaign, rejected by Mitt Romney. There wasn't a lot of hunger, in Congress at the time to take on that issue, even though maybe some people in congressional seats believed Barack Obama wasn't a citizen. So my point only is that because it is laundered through all these institutions and media, giving credibility, the left-wing conspiracies are giving much credibility by people who we used to trust. Like, when I was a young person, if the former head of the CIA came out and told you something was happening, you wouldn't be like, yeah, he's making it up. I mean, maybe you would have, but most people would have been.
Maybe you should have.
Maybe I should have, is right. Maybe I was too trusting. But you would have probably believed them to some extent. Or the New York Times. Like, you read the New York Times, you knew it was biased, you read between the lines, you tried to figure out what was going on, but you never thought out of whole cloth they would just make up something, which is essentially what happened. So I think that's changed, and obviously no one trusts them anymore. But anyway, I don't know if I'm even answering your question, but that's the difference. Yeah. Sort of the quality, the plausibility, the people behind it.
This episode is sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it actually lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do, it's so easy, is breathe right into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Lumen will tell you if you are burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. It's so amazing. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. Again, that is incredible. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. It can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off those cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/undercurrents to get 15% off Lumen. Great deal. That is lumen.me/undercurrents for 15% off your purchase. So the left would then come in and say, it is so true that McCain and Romney repudiated birtherism, and you know where I'm going with this, but then Republicans elected one of the chief birther people, and birtherism obviously was this idea that Barack Obama was born in Kenya and thus was ineligible to be president and had lied about it, and there was a birth certificate lying around somewhere. And when Donald Trump got elected, this was sort of the mainstreaming of the birtherism conspiracy theory. I'll just add, David, and I'm sure you know this argument, but he's he had to repudiate that. Marjorie Taylor Greene had to repudiate QAnon before being elected to Congress, and the other conspiracy rabbit holes that she had gone down prior to being elected. Is that kind of the rebuttal to the point that, well, Trump himself was the chief birther and he was commander in chief, therefore it's just as mainstream?
In a sense, it is. I mean, that conspiracy because of him. But my argument is that I just don't, I mean, he did need to repudiate. Adam Schiff is going to have a better job. He has a better job now than he did during Russia collusion. A lot of the reporters who spread Russia collusion are going to have better jobs today than they did then. That's one difference, of course. But I mean, I think I view Donald Trump also. I think though Obama did it as well, sort of like we're vax autism truthers and stuff like that. Gets a little complicated, but sure. I mean, Donald Trump is a very unique figure in American politics. I don't really even view him as a Republican, since a big part of his message is that Republicans suck, right? Like a big part of his message is that he's going to undo what Republicans have done, or whatever. So even in this election, I view it more as a victory for normies. I think most of his policies are very moderate, very populist, have cross ideological appeals. I don't think any of his new voters are, being pulled into the party because of his, sort of conservatism, supposedly, or his conspiratorial views. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference. I think you pointed out the difference between the two. And again, I am certainly not making excuses for the left. There are podcasters out there, with 1 million followers or whatever, who are conspiracy theorists. The thing is, though, again, the media will, with pedantic precision, fact check every single claim of these people all the time. If they, even bring them up when no one's talking about it, because they want to show how crazy the left is. They'll go out nut picking. On the left, they won't. I mean, there are paranoid currents in American politics that are nefarious, like perniciously terrible. Like like all the racial stuff, for instance, that there's a suppression of the vote among black people, that their agencies are being stripped of them, that white cops are out there hunting young black men and killing them, wholesale all the time. I mean, these are undercurrents of paranoia, or the Handmaid's Tale stuff, where you're having a debate about abortion and all of a sudden they tell you want to put women in servitude. Those aren't conspiracy theories as much as just a paranoid style of politics. And I think, that Trump is Hitler, that semi-fascists are on the way. Maybe this election broke that fever, but we'll see.
So that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. Before we get too far out of the news cycle, I'm curious as to where you think this is going, because this so much of BlueAnon was fueled by the Russia collusion conspiracy, which was like a very traditional conspiracy, totally mainstream. Everyone was taking the now laughable Rachel Maddow monologue seriously when she was doing like Glenn Beck on a chalkboard circa 2012 with Russia collusion, and being not pilloried for it, but actually celebrated and lionized for this reporting. And I put reporting in scare quotes, or I should put reporting in square quotes, but it seems, David, like maybe the fever has broken, because since Donald Trump has won re-election, we have not seen the resistance really successfully take up this fever again. It doesn't seem like the same level of frenzy, the same level of trying to somehow pin this on Vladimir Putin, or draw up this strange theory that starts with one person and goes down 1 million different rabbit holes. Did BlueAnon end with the re-election of Donald Trump, or should we expect that this is maybe a period of quiet before another storm, which, by the way, is worth remembering, kind of happened in 2016 too. There was some calm for a minute and then jumped back to Russia collusion. That's
a good question. First, I'd say I think that it was just too solid of a victory, maybe, for a lot of conspiracy theories to actually work. That I think that you could see before election day a lot of Democrats coming to terms with the fact that they were probably going to lose. Their candidate was terrible. Their vice presidential candidate was one of the worst ever. It's a difficult thing for them to come up with some conspiracy theory there. Moreover, I think the problem was, and we saw it in the election results, that the media, the driver of these things, just doesn't have the power anymore to convince people that anything's happening. I mean, let's be honest, the whole central case for the left leading up to election day was that Republicans were basically Nazis. I mean, they were fascists. Trump was a would-be Hitler and all of that. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. For many of them, that was the point. So That itself is paranoid. But then when they lost, you saw almost every minority group move towards Trump. Jewish people, for very obvious reasons, Israel, others, black voters, and things like that. So obviously, they don't control what we think anymore. They can't get away with it. I think that's part of it as well. I went over to MSNBC. I watched them for Schadenfreude purposes sometimes, and they're still nuts over there. I mean, it's not like Rachel Maddow or Chris Hayes or Joy Reid are wondering like maybe we shouldn't call everyone a Nazi we don't like and fascist. They're trying to understand how so many people voted for Nazis, and that's that culture has to change before you get any kind of real. I wouldn't call it journalism, but even opinion journalism that's useful to anyone other than rabid partisans. So I think there's a long way to go. The culture in these places, and I mean this in normal journalistic places, is like the New York Times, where assistant editors will revolt and get the op-ed page editor fired. The whole culture is upside down. I don't know that you can just fix that with one election loss, but we'll see. I mean, right now it is pretty quiet, so we'll see how it shakes out.
There are, many highly educated people throughout, recent history who are conspiracy theorists. That's basically, I mean, the average conspiracy theorist is somebody who does pay very close attention to news, which is confusing if you don't spend a lot of time paying attention to conspiracy theories, but that is typically the case. My question is, how does somebody like Rachel Maddow or Chris Hayes or Jonathan Chait, very good example, perched at New York Magazine, as you point out, how do they, as the self-appointed debunkers of conspiracy theories, not have an ounce of self-awareness to kind of catch themselves in 2017 or 2018 or even today, and kind of look in the mirror and say, I'm starting to sound a little bit like a birther. I'm starting to sound a little bit like a chemtrail person with my sketch of how Donald Trump has been a Russian asset since the late 1980s. What is it about people who are so overexposed? They're in the media every single day. They're making these theories as loudly as they possibly can. And Molly Jong-Fast, you'll see her on MSNBC every single day. Barbara McQuaid, you'll see her on MSNBC almost every single day. And she said, the laptop is Russian, period. That was a post that she put out during the Hunter Biden laptop story. Is like, why is it that they don't have the self-awareness to stop?
Maybe they do. I mean, here's how I view it. First of all, there's a mob kind of psychology that goes on here. If you think about Blue Sky and how well the liberals are going, or many of them are going over there, you're in a bubble, you're siloed, you're reinforcing the craziness constantly. You're picking facts that all conspiracy theorists, there's always a seed of truth in the things they're talking about. What they do is they take that, they take some seed of truth and, go to crazy places. And if you ask them questions, they'll be like, that's exactly what that's exactly what they would ask, and they cobble together all these things. Another part of that is that within progressivism, which is taken over the far left, has always been progressivism, socialism, those kind of ideas. They are susceptible to conspiracies because they believe a few people can control, like a few millionaires or a few billionaires can control the entire economy. They always believe that there's some shady, nefarious group of white, rich men who can control all of society. And so they're always thinking that way. But the people you mentioned, there are the cynical people who spread this stuff, and there are the credulous, partisans who believe it because they want to. Most of the people you mentioned, I think, are just cynical people. Maybe some of them convince themselves these things are true, but they're doing it for political reasons because they think, it will help them win. Like Morning Joe, he'll say, he's in on every conspiracy theory about Trump, and he'll say Trump is going to take journalists to camps and execute them and all of that. And then he loses and he realizes it wasn't work. He realizes that tact wasn't working. So boom, he's calling Trump and, trying to have a discussion about the future and all that. I mean, if you really thought someone was Hitler, you wouldn't be opening conversations with, these conversations with him. So I think the people you mentioned are just cynical.
I was about to say something both subtle and mean as well. I guess I will just say it, David. You are slightly older than I am and remember the Clinton era very, very well. So I wonder if you think there's something that's kind of changed in the conservative world. I'm just thinking about like mainstreaming of conspiracy theories because you mentioned Morning Joe, and I'm like, well, Donald Trump is kind of one of the people who has a conspiracy theory about Joe Scarborough's tragically dead intern, or Vince Foster, and some of that was mainstream in terms of like being part of talk radio culture. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Rush Limbaugh talked about Vince Foster, and it's not that there was nothing. I mean, even people who debunk Vince Foster conspiracy theories look at it and are like, we get why people were asking questions about this, but there were a lot of Watergate, Clinton type conspiracy theories circulating in conservative media at the time. Did something change? Did the gatekeeping become more intense? Like, was there a difference between the Clinton era and maybe the Obama and then Trump era?
That's the nicest way I've ever been called old, I think. Well, obviously what's changed is the internet in a lot of ways that, obviously in the 60s, Birchers and all these people had similar kind of ideas about Eisenhower and others. People are always kind of grappling for a way to explain things that aren't working out for them, or if the flow of politics is heading away from where they want it to go, they'll come up with something. But obviously the
But the
internet
Birchers were
happened.
famously not allowed to write in National Review.
Yeah, they were kicked out of National Review, which is good. There was gatekeeping. I'm not against, as I like gatekeeping in some sense. You don't, the idea, I get this a lot where I'm like, well, this person, let's call them John Doe, is insane and shouldn't really be featured and, lifted up as a person to speak to, to give legitimacy to. Everyone's like, why do you hate free speech? Well, part of free speech is discerning, who you want to talk to and who you want to give a platform to. So I'm fine with social media being neutral, speech neutral, but I think people have a responsibility not to have crazy people on their shows. So
I guess I failed, David.
yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah,
Here
exactly.
you
I
are.
wouldn't want
Here
government
you
coming
are.
in and making Emily, put David Harsanyi on 5 days a week to for his common sense. But I'm just saying, I think we have a responsibility to have some gatekeeping. So the 90s, you had that, and then you had social media, which is even worse, right? Again, people silo themselves. There's all kinds of craziness going on. People believe all kinds of things, partially because we've lost trust in basically every institution, especially media. So you can't trust them. You look for alternative voices, and some in conservative media do a good job, but there are plenty of people, I think are bad actors. So there's a lot, it's just wilder. The information comes quicker. There's a lot more conspiratorial thinking out there. When I was young, long, long time ago, there was no internet, and you probably had magazines or something where you would find some people like yourself. But now you can instantaneously find millions of people who think what you think. And that obviously reinforces stuff. The talk radio stuff, I have to look into it a little more, but I think it is slightly overdone. Rush might have mentioned it, and because the Clintons acted in very shady ways all the time and brought a lot of suspicion upon themselves for the way they acted.
Well, and can I add quickly, David? Also, because the corporate media was not covering what the Clintons did, and that pushed the talk radio circuit to be more intense on the Clintons because there was this frustration about how the mainstream media. I mean, that's what was going to happen with the Lewinsky story until Drudge came along.
That's right, Drudge, and the American Spectator at the time was this alternative conservative magazine that had amazing writers that that did a lot of investigations there, and some of them, some of the things. And this is another thing: the left always, projects or gaslights you, accuses you of being a conspiracy theorist when they don't like something. It happened with Lewinsky, like you mentioned. Hillary Clinton went on the Today Show and said there was a vast right wing conspiracy to undermine her. Which obviously didn't turn out to be true. So that's part of it as well. Yeah, the Clintons did a lot of shady stuff and the media, loved them and acted in a way that made a lot of people suspicious. So again, I don't think it's wrong to ask a question about Vince Foster. I don't think it's wrong to ask a question about Ron Brown or anyone else. I mean, a lot of weird stuff went on during the Clinton years. But once you realize that there's nothing there, or probably nothing there, it's time to move on, and a lot of people don't want to do that anymore, with Obama, with, other stuff. So what's changed, I just think, is the speed and the way we obtain this information and the people we get to meet and and kind of reinforce the worst, our worst instincts, our most conspiratorial instincts.
Well, one thing that comes through in your book that I was thinking about is it actually makes me wonder about maybe one of the big things that's changed is the so-called mainstream media becoming more and more hyper-partisan, but also like sort of more sanctimonious and just sort of intensely doubling down on covering things ideologically while also maintaining this like facade of neutrality. And I think that has pushed some people on the right, understandably, into conspiratorial territory because it's maddening to be told over and over again, to be gaslit over and over again by the gatekeepers and the defenders of democracy, all of these things that are just flat out wrong. I mean, that just accelerates, I think, conspiratorial thinking on the right. And to the extent that people like Donald Trump, who, play with conspiracy theories, I don't know what he actually believes, are now creeping into the mainstream of politics, it's a response. I mean, Donald Trump is first and foremost a response to the media.
And I think Obama's sort of unilateral dictatorial rule. I think people got sick of it, and the Democrats still embrace that kind of Obama view of governance, which I think hurts them. But yeah, of course, when I was younger, and I lived in I grew up in New York, there were a lot of newspapers. You knew that newspapers had a bias. The idea that we're going to get reporters who are unbiased, it's just not going to happen. The prism in which you view the world informs how you report. So that means who you go after, what you're talking about, the way the euphemisms or the words you use. So that's not going away. And I don't really even want it to go away. I think it's fine to have a point of view. Problem is that in those days there was bias, and now there's activism. So you mentioned the Hunter Biden story, laptop story that the New York Post reported really well. They had the laptop, they had the slip, they did everything. The journalistic ethics of that story were very high. And yet what happened? The whole media tried to censor it. Social media platforms helped them. And then what did they do? So we know it's true now. They went on and they hid the acuity decline, the physical decline of the president, who is not in any shape to do that job. They gaslit you if you mentioned it. That's activism. That's not journalism. And then when it was, he had the debate and it was obvious to everyone what was going on, they just on a dime turned, pushed him out and got a new candidate. And working in concert with the leadership and the people behind the scenes, who run the Democratic Party. So that's activism. When I worked in a newspaper in the 2000s, there were some old time reporters there who were communists, I would say, but they loved nothing more than to take down someone powerful. It didn't matter to them it was a Democrat or not, I don't think. And I think, again, with the culture from the top, from the journalism schools, you see these journalism professors online, they're basically pro censorship a lot of the time, the big names, that is just, it's mind boggling to me because, the leftist I knew journalists were zealously pro free speech, even, for the worst kind of people. I mean, again, if someone my age, you remember, every columnist, or not, I don't remember every columnist, but a lot of people defending ACLU and everyone else, defending the Skokie Nazis marching and stuff like that. And now they want to tell you what to say. They're all for the disinformation, misinformation, censorship regime. So it's a culture change within journalism. I think we need journalists who don't go to journalism school. That's the key. I think Watergate changed. I'm all over the place, but I think Watergate changed a lot of this, where journalists became crusaders for, causes rather than people who were just cynics and skeptical and who wanted to take down the powerful. I'm never mad that, people are in the White House press room, yelling about, a Donald Trump's press secretary and being really, pushy and all that. I'm mad that they don't do it for Biden, that they don't do it for the other side. I want journalists to go after everyone with that kind of zeal, but of course they don't. And I don't want them to lie and make up or spread conspiracy theories. I think there's plenty there for them, with Donald Trump and everyone else to go after without having to lie. I think they hurt their own cause, actually, in many ways.
And what are some of the other high-profile mainstream conspiracy theories on the left? Well, I shouldn't say mainstream on the left. I should just see mainstream and maybe from the left. We've talked about Russia collusion. That is a very obvious one. And it's one where it's like another thing that comes through in the book is how owning the media and having control of the media is almost a disadvantage for the left because it pushes them into some really crazy places. Their bubbles don't get popped, and it just metastasizes because they don't let people in to criticize them and ask as many questions. But that is so obvious in Russia collusion. Where else have we seen this in recent years, David?
Well, let me just quickly say on the, one more thing on the journalism front. All the incentives to be a really good journalist are not there. The incentive, who's going to get the million followers on Twitter, or X, the person who is out there, bashing Trump and whatever,
or a Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, exactly. The high profile gigs, you're going to probably become some kind of analyst or columnist or whatever. So the incentive isn't there to just be a really good journalist, sit there for a month, really track down a story. The other problem is the internet does, there is a race now. You want to be there first. So people make more, journalists make more mistakes. I can remember working at the Denver Post, and there were two reporters who were assigned a story that would take them a year. They would have a year to just sit there and really work a story. That's a big expense. Most conservative media doesn't have the kind of money to have just two reporters sitting there working on something that, incidentally, there's a high probability will not turn into anything. A lot of stories that you're chasing, in the end, they're not there, and you just have to move on. So I don't know that conservative media has the capital to compete against these big institutional journalistic, like New York Times and Washington Post, to do the right thing. So, like I said, most conspiracies on the left are highly calibrated for plausibility. They're, polished up so that people will believe them. Part of my book, and I go through this, is how the left will take normal things that we believed in forever, religious freedom, natural rights, but others as well, and frame them as something weird and outlandish. If Donald Trump does something like fire someone at the Justice Department, it becomes an attack on democracy, whereas everyone does that. It's the executive branch. He is empowered to do it. Another one that I think we don't talk about enough that is incredibly apocalyptic is environmental, ideas. So people walk around not having children because they think the world's going to end in 10 years. And they always put it off another 10 years. As I've been around a long time, I remember hearing this 20, 30 years ago. So the kind of things that they talk about and believe are insane. I mean, the idea that the world is just going to be a ball of fire and we won't be able to live in it.
An Inconvenient Truth won Oscars.
Oh, thanks for reminding me. How about this? This is a great, I think, example of how the left's nuts are treated and the right's nuts. So Alex Jones, he lost his company, owes people money and all that, rightfully so, I think. Michael Moore got a standing ovation at the Oscars in 2006 for Fahrenheit 9/11, which is just a bunch of insane conspiracy theorists about how the Bush family and the Saudis worked together to make 9/11 happen. He's a rich man. Fahrenheit 9/11, I think, is a third or one of the top grossing documentaries of all time. Now, if Alex Jones did that, would he be at the Oscars? Of course not. So that's how we treat, our nuts differently, or they are treated by society differently.
That is a deep cut, but a great cut.
Do people not remember Michael Moore?
Fahrenheit 9/11, this actually just makes your point, has been totally memory hold in that, if you're Gen X, you remember Fahrenheit 9/11 being, maybe some boomers, but you remember that being incredibly influential. That was hot. Everyone was watching that and talking about it. And for millennials, it basically was disappeared. I don't think Gen Z really knows about it. Maybe they'll rediscover it on TikTok soon and be fascinated by it, much like the Bin Laden letter. But it's sort of faded into the background as it was proven to be sillier and sillier. There was no grappling with it.
They talk about Bush W now, as this great statesman. Obviously every Republican who's out of power always becomes, the better Republican. But at the time, he was called a Nazi all the time. And it wasn't exactly on the fringes either. There were a lot of people, and listen, I get the Iraq war was complicated and how we got in there was complicated, but the idea that he was scheming with the Bin Ladens to make all this money was nutso. And yeah, it was pretty popular, I would say, on the left. I can tell you in 2006 there was a poll of Democrats, and over 50% believed, by Scripps or something, but over 50% believed that George Bush had known about 9/11. There were other polls before that about how his dad had known about, had been involved somehow, that incredibly large amount of Democrats believed. And then you go to 2018. So almost, whatever years later, the over like almost 60% of Democrats believe that Putin had manipulated vote totals. Not that he had put some Facebook ads up, but that he had manipulated the vote totals, which was even beyond the conspiracy being spread. So obviously very, like, I know polls aren't perfect, but obviously very effective conspiracies.
Which the Clinton campaign, it's also memory hold. We don't remember. She actually flirted with that idea that vote totals may have been changed, and it wasn't the same level as like Dominion voting machines, but she did do it.
No, her campaign also started birtherism. People forget that.
Yes.
It was first spread by her campaign. Clintons are behind a lot of stuff that is kind of ugly in the last 30 years of American history.
Well, I was just going to say, if you want to make people believe conspiracy theories more and more, if you want to make conspiracy theories seem credible, Rachel Maddow, you're going to have to keep proving them true. Like the Clintons being behind birtherism proves true. And then secondly, the idea that the FBI and CIA were colluding behind the scenes with Democratic operatives to plant false allegations of Russia collusion. Like they're making everybody believe conspiracy theories because they are doing the conspiracy theories.
I mean, the dossier is a Clinton creation, right? I mean, a DNC and Clinton campaign creation. And again, people will tell me, well, most of it is true. Yeah, that's how they do. They put a bunch of true stuff and surround it with crazy stuff so they can give it kind of plausibility. That's how conspiracy theories work. And a lot of people think that the bigger the conspiracy theory or the more outrageous it is, the easier it is to debunk. Well, that's not true. Russia collusion, to say that we have a Manchurian candidate in the presidency is like, that former CIA people say is former FBI agents say is true. The media says is true. There are sources that say it's true. Well, that's hard to debunk for a normal person. It's hard not to, in the past, it would have been hard to say, oh, that's not, something I believe, because so many credible, institutional people are saying it's true. Now we don't believe them anymore. But at the time, it wasn't that simple. So it took a bit of, time and work to debunk it. And again, there was no reckoning for it. No one paid a price for it. Everyone, except for a few people maybe early on, got fired. But everyone is doing fine who was involved in that. So the incentive, why not do it again in the future if it can paralyze a whole administration?
It's a super interesting book. One of the coolest covers that I've seen in years. David Harsanyi, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's edition of Undercurrents. As a reminder, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, so please subscribe to the channel. It helps us so much. Please, another way to help is leaving likes and reviews. Super, super useful to us as we build the program. If you want the premium version of the show, head on over to undercurrents.tv for the full experience of Undercurrents. You get a premium subscriber-only paywall episode at least once a week, so make sure to tune in over at undercurrents.tv. We will see you back here soon.